Hi, I'm Janice Switlo. I'm carrying on with this web series, and I'm going to relate today's talk to the first two episodes that I have released on this channel. So essentially, I'm going to point out the limits of jurisdiction and why these election codes and membership codes that many have been almost forced to put in place in order to dovetail, as I mentioned before, into the framework process. I want to reassure you the limits of what it can actually achieve. Now, in all of this, remember that these kinds of documents can serve to speak for you if you remain silent. If a chief and council, for example, encouraged by Canadian governments, uses these documents to say, well, I can now make all decisions for the membership, it's important that you put on the public record, both with your chief and council as well as Canadian representatives, and no harm in informing the Crown, that that's just simply not the case. Why is this important? Because of the representations that are contained in these enforcement of framework agreements that are being done with Canada and respective provinces. So, election code, membership code, and I'll deal with the Constitutional Act and code in a minute. Election code, membership code, remember, even though you're led to believe that that's something you're doing under your own laws, you're not. You're doing it for purposes of the Indian Act. You're doing it for establishing the membership list of the Indian band for purposes of the Indian Act. You are doing an election code for purposes of electing chief counselor and counselors for purposes of the Indian Act. And as I explained at length and put on the public record, as I mentioned before, the authorities of everything does not rest with Indian Act entities. Chief and council, with greatest respect to the individuals holding those positions, is not a commentary on their capabilities or complicity, if you will, in the situation. The fact is, their authorities are defined by, those positions are defined by the Indian Act. Now, a lot of people say, well, the solution is get rid of the Indian Act. Well, hold on a minute, because all of these things that they are putting in place, it's important to remember that your continuing Constitution remains in existence. Your laws remain in existence. What does this mean? This means that when a chief then moves forward and signs into, a chief counselor signs into a framework agreement, purportedly on your behalf and purportedly on the basis of relying on these documents that say, well, they handed over authorities. What the only thing you did was hand over authorities for purposes of the Indian Act. You did not delegate your decision-making powers under your laws. And that's an important distinction. So while these so-called laws are held out to be much more than they really are, it's important in terms of dealing with this process that's underway, that's designed to do you in, that you carefully look at the limits of jurisdiction of what's been done. So a lot of people, listening to the first parts of these episodes, might think, oh my goodness, we passed one of these things. So I want to assure you that provided you understand the limitations of the authorities that can be exercised by chief counselor and counselors under the Indian Act, and the limitations of what these documents are designed for, then, and as well, you make it clear that you haven't handed over anything and you will not sit by silently while they purport to exercise authorities that they simply do not possess. Then you have this third item, the Constitutional Code. Now, this is a situation that says, okay, we're a standalone, we're identifying ourselves as this entity. And the effectiveness of this is to try to remove you from the nation proper. Each reserve is not a standalone nation. It is a community within a nation. Speaking now with regarding Constitution Act. those are intended to remove you from the nation proper. Each reservation, each reserve is not a standalone nation. A couple of hundred people, even 1,000 people, are not a nation. You're part of something much bigger. And these constitution acts and codes purport to set out basically like a municipal kind of structure. Now, it's important to understand that when people want to remove themselves, it's not their sole decision that makes that happen. The nation proper needs to release the people. And that's not happening when these things are passed. So in other words, if an American wishes to relinquish American citizenship, for example, or another country, there's a process they have to go through seeking permission from the country. So all of these constitutional codes that have been passed that purport to say, these people are this standalone little community and they absolve themselves of any connection to a larger grand nation, just don't have that effect in law. So I will continue on with some discussion pertaining to the framework process in the next episode. Thank you for your time today.